Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants and dear friends. Welcome to this session of Quran 14 series. Today we're going to start a new chapter in the study of the Quran, and we will, inshallah, begin by studying various surahs of the Quran. So it would be a textual study of the Quran that we are now going to begin. And the purpose is that once that you have been introduced with the various topics of the Quran, and once that you have been introduced to the theme of the Quran, the language of the Quran, the history and its revelation, and all these background details, I do think that time is now ripe to study the text of the Quran. And obviously, the Quran is a huge book, and the way that I have chosen to teach you this text of the Quran is to select certain surahs of the Quran and then read their translation, try to understand the message of God directly from the text. And if we have any questions and discussions, we can of course proceed. So let's begin. We will start off with surah of the Quran. This surah is called Surah Al-Qamar, and this surah actually is one of the shorter surahs of the Quran. We know that there are a total of 114 surahs in the Quran, and we've also been introduced to the theme of the Quran and to the arrangement and structure of the Quran. So, as far as the structure of the Quran is concerned, we have been discussing that the Quran is divided into chapters. So there are a total of 7 chapters that you have been told. And these chapters, of course, have the surahs arranged in them in a very meticulous way, in a very meaningful way. The initial surahs of each chapter are Meccan surahs, and each chapter ends on a Medinan surah. So Surah Qamar that we are going to study today is actually a surah of the 6th chapter of the Quran. So the 6th chapter of the Quran actually starts off with Surah Qaf, which is the 50th surah, and ends on the 66th surah, which is Surah Tahrim. And within that, we find, of course, Surah Qamar, which is amongst the surahs which constitute the 6th chapter of the Quran. So, the way that we're going to study the text of the Quran is that we will read various paragraphs of this surah. I'll read the text, and one of you would be reading the translation. And then regarding each text that we have studied, or each paragraph that we have studied, we'll have a brief discussion. And hopefully, inshallah, we will cover many surahs in this way. And I also do hope that in this way, we do come closer to God. Remember, the reason that we study the Quran, the primary reason which makes us motivated to come near the Quran and study it, is that it is the last and the final message of God. And in order to know about God, in order to understand Him, in order to follow Him, it is imperative that we are able to understand the surahs or the message of the Quran, and therefore our connection with God is strengthened as a result of that. So let's begin with the first part of our surah. I think that you can see it being displayed just before you. This is the first section. It's the first paragraph. The words are اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر وإن يروا آية يعرضوا ويقولوا سحر مستمر وكذبوا واتبعوا أهواءهم وكل أمر مستقر ولقد جاءهم من الأنباء ما فيه مزدجر حكمة بالغة فما تغني النذر. Okay, let me ask Mahin. Mahin, could you read the first paragraph, please?
The first paragraph is, the hour which they are being warned of is about to arrive, and the moon is cleft asunder. But they will not profess faith, and whatever sign they see, they will only evade it and remark, this is a magic that has been handed down from the past. Thus, this is what has happened, and they have been denied even now and followed their fancies. We did not seize them immediately because with us every matter has an appointed time. The anecdotes of the past have come before them, which have for them much less than profound wisdom. But of what use are warnings for these rebellious people?
So you see, if you just read through the text of the Quran, the first thing that strikes us that it is addressing the nation of the Prophet, the people of the Prophet's nation, and they were the Quraysh or the Bani Ismail or the idolaters of Arabia, and they were warned that if they deny the Prophet of God intentionally, then a punishment will visit them and destroy them. And they would actually deny this punishment, and they would say, well, they would actually make fun of the Prophet and say, well, if the punishment is going to visit us, we would like to see a sign for it, and if we've shown some sign of this nature, that maybe we can believe in that, and therefore attest to the veracity of the messenger. And it is known from this surah that in the times of the Prophet, the Almighty actually showed them various signs, and one of them was that the moon was cleft asunder. So it was something which was, divided into two just for a moment or so, and then it just flung back. It just the two parts, they were severed from each other, they were cleft asunder, and then back they came. It was like a momentary sort of a thing, and some people saw it who were right there. So it was not a miracle which was shown by Prophet Muhammad himself, as is generally understood or considered. It was a sign which actually the Almighty showed them, and in order to tell them that one day they will be destroyed, and one day the Almighty has the power to destroy this whole world, and also has the power to make them visit, make the punishment visit them. So this sign was shown to them, and it has been reported in contemporary history as well that this is something which took place in the times of the Prophet. And although we don't have a lot of record, but because of the fact that this was just a momentary thing, it was not a planned thing, it was not something which people were pre-announced. It was just a thing which happened. So therefore, the moon being cleft asunder and then being brought back, uh, in spite of the fact that many of them saw this, but they never professed faith. And this is what these verses actually say: that whatever sign they will see, you look what the translation which Mahin just read, that whatever sign they see, they will only evade and remark this is a magic that is being handed down from the past. So, because of the fact that they had become prone to denying the Prophet in spite of being convinced. So the first thing that they did was they asked for a sign, and when they were shown such a huge sign, they just ignored it and thought that it was just a magic of the eyes, or maybe it was just an eye wash, in spite of the fact that they knew it was not an eye wash. So this is how they would create an excuse for that. And so the verses say that this is what has happened, and they have denied even now and followed their fancies. And we did not seize them immediately, because with us every matter has an appointed time. So one of the questions and objections which these idolaters will raise is that if we are doing something wrong, then why doesn't the Almighty catch us? Why doesn't He seize us and destroy us or punish us? Because the fact that He is giving us respite, because of the fact that we are being dealt with in a lenient way, it does show that the Almighty has no plans of seizing us. And the Almighty is actually answering this very objection here, and He says that, well, with me, there is a time for everything to happen. It's not just going to happen in a haphazard way. If there is this time for their destruction which has been prescribed and fixed, it will come at the time when it has been ordained. It will not come before that. So if they are being given a concession, if they are being given a respite, it is might as well for the fact that they should mend their ways, instead of saying that why is it that punishment is not coming, and if it is not coming, it only shows that it has no plans to come. And then the Quran further tells these people, it says that وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّنَ الْأَنبَاءِ مَا فِيهِ مُزْدَجَرٌ, that how can you deny this? Because the same thing have happened, the same thing or the same attitude was adopted by the previous nations as well. And they denied their prophets, and they actually demanded a sign from those prophets. And when the signs were shown to them, again they denied. So this is something which is something of a pattern that has gone on, and so therefore, if this is happening all over and over again, it's like an assurance which is sounded to Prophet Muhammad, and he's being told, well, this is what they're going to say. No matter what you show them, no matter what sign you bring before them, they will just say that these are anecdotes of the past, and this is a magic which is being handed down. And whereas hikmatun balighatun fama tughnin nuzur, what use are these warnings for these rebellious people. I mean, the more you show them these warnings, the more they draw away. So the thing which is the Quran is stressing here is that they have no intention to believe. When they say that they should be shown a sign of that punishment, they are just making up this excuse. Because in the past they have been shown these signs, and in the past the previous nations have behaved similarly, and every time they ended up in a disaster, they were destroyed, and never had the urge and the inclination to accept faith. So this is basically a rehearsal, which is again going on. It's like history repeating itself, which the Quran is telling us, or telling the Prophet that he should rest assured, and if they are not accepting faith, it is not because he is doing something less or he is doing something insufficient. No, it is because they have decided to deny him. Okay, let's move ahead. So, فَتَوَلَّ عَنْهُمْ يَوْمَ يَدْعُ الدَّاعِي إِلَى شَيْءٍ نُكُرٍ خُشَّ عَنْ أَبْصَارُهُمْ يَخْرُجُونَ مِنَ الْأَجْدَاثِ كَأَنَّهُمْ جَرَادٌ مُنْتَشِرٌ مُهْطِعِينَ إِلَى الدَّاعِ يَقُولُ الْكَافِرُونَ هَذَا يَوْمٌ عَسِرٌ. Yes, please go ahead with the English translation.
For this reason, turn away from them and wait for the day in which a summoner will summon them to a thing very undesirable. Their eyes will be downcast on that day. They will come out of their graves running towards the summoner as if they are locusts scattered about. At that time, these disbelievers will cry out, "This is a very difficult day that has arrived."
So you see, the Quran tells them that, well, today they're denying and they are so vehement in their denial, but the day is going to come when a summoner is going to summon them, a caller is going to call them that now the day of judgment has arrived. So remember, we have been told in the Quran that when the day of judgment will arrive, it will be signaled uh, by a trumpet. It will be signaled that a big trumpet will be blown, and that will actually signal the fact that this will go a process of destruction, and slowly and surely it will be transformed into a new world. And so they are being told that today they have gathered to deny, but this is going to happen one day when this world is going to finish. And when the summoner is going to summon them, they will come out of their graves, and this is how, of course, the day of judgment is going to take place. That every person who has died and been consigned to grave or at any other place, he or she will come out of that grave and look at the simile or the comparison which is spelled out here. It says Jaradu Muntashir, which means locusts scattered about. So if you have ever seen those locusts on those fields, maybe you've not, because when we are living in cities, we don't have such visuals normally in cities. These visuals can be clearly seen in areas where we cultivate our lands, and when the land is afflicted by various diseases. So one of them is that locusts come and they actually destroy the land, and then it happens that these locusts also are destroyed either by weather or by some other thing, and you just find them. There are thousands and scores of these locusts just scattered about, and they have all died. I'm sure this sight is something which creates awe in us. And this is what it says, that it will be as if they are coming out like locusts which are scattered about. And when they actually arrive before the Almighty, do remember that the verses are actually speaking of disbelievers. It's not just speaking of the believers, because for them, the way they'll come out and the way they'll face the Almighty, it is all mentioned in the Quran in a very positive way. It will not be going to be a difficult time. It will be a day of ease for them. They'll be happy. But the description here is regarding the disbelievers. At that time, these disbelievers, who are now denying their prophet way, but at that time they will immediately accept. But as the Quran tells us that the acceptance at that time will be of no use, because to the Almighty, real faith is something you profess through various signs regarding a certain belief. It's not that when you see that thing happening that it becomes worthy of belief, and that is not acceptable as well. Okay, let's move on to the next part. And now we see that the various anecdotes of the prophets of God are mentioned. And okay, let me read the Arabic first. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح فكذبوا عبدنا وقالوا مجنون وازدجر فدعا ربه أني مغلوب فانتصر ففتحنا أبواب السماء بماء منهمر وفجرنا الأرض عيونا فالتقى الماء على أمر قد قدر وحملناه على ذات ألواح ودسر تجري بأعيننا جزاء لمن كان كفر ولقد تركناها آية فهل من مدكر فكيف كان عذابي ونذر. So please go ahead with the translation.
Before them, the folks of Noah also similarly denied. So they rejected our servant and called him a madman, and he was badly scolded. At last he pleaded to his Lord, I am vanquished, now you take revenge from them. It was then what we opened the gates of the heavens with stormy rain pouring forth and caused the earth to cleave asunder. In such a manner springs burst forth all over it. Then the water of heavens and the earth met at the point decreed for it. And we carried Noah on that which was made of planks and nails, which kept sailing under our protection. This we did as a recompense for him who had been slighted, and we made this anecdote an exemplary sign. So is there anyone who would take heed? Behold then how was my punishment and how was my warning.
Okay, so clearly all of you must have this story of the Prophet Noah in his mind or her mind, because this is something which is mentioned so many times in the Quran and so many times in the Bible. And the deluge of Noah, the famous flood which came in the times of Noah, is actually referred to in these verses. And you can see that once the people of Noah, and for Noah, I think that there's another important thing that you need to know is that from other parts of the Quran, so we have been told that he actually spent 950 years with his people, and he actually called them to God for 950 years. That's a hell of a long time, and it's in spite of such a long time they actually denied him, and for them destruction was then destined. And the way in which this destruction took place was that a huge flood came, and the way in which this flood came was that the the earth was made to spring all its water, and all the fountains and the seas, they start to gush forth, and there was a huge uh, burst of rain which actually uh, totally routed the people who were there in those times. And then, as you can see, that everyone was destroyed except for Noah and his nation and his people. And regarding Noah, we know that his own son actually also was amongst those who were destroyed, because he was amongst those people who did not accept faith. And this actually tells us that as far as God's system is concerned, God's justice is concerned, it is equal for all. So if a person who is born and raised in the house of a prophet of God, as was the case with the son of Noah, even he is going to face punishment if he ends up intentionally denying, and if he arrogantly rejects the reality. Let me just ask you that now that you have read of the text of the Quran, so there is this part which says that so they rejected our servant and called him the madman, and he was badly scolded. Who exactly is this madman? Anyone who can answer? So what is this expression madman? To whom is it referring to? Nida Aziz, what do you think?
I'm not sure.
Okay, the best thing is to read it from the beginning. Read the sentence from the beginning. Start off with this. Before them, the folks of Noah also similarly denied. Denied who? Denied Noah. So they rejected our servant. So basically, it's Noah who is being referred to. God is saying, Abadana. In the first part, you have the sentence in an indirect way. It's in an indirect speech, so to speak. And then it suddenly addresses and turns its attention towards Noah, who was mentioned in an indirect way in the first verse. It says, so they rejected our servant, referring to Noah, and they called him a madman. So this is a common practice of the peoples of the nations of the prophets, that they would often not only make fun of those prophets, they would also call them that these are all madmen, they're all possessed. So the word our servant actually here refers to Noah himself. And this whole picture, as you can see, is a picture which describes that storm. So does any one of you know that how can this sign, this whole flood be a sign for all of us? And maybe you can think of the fact that there was something which which has still existed after that huge deluge which took place centuries ago. Anyone can think of something which still exists, some remnant of the incident of Noah that we can still, but that as human beings we can still find some sign of. Does anything come to your mind? Okay, so maybe you can search the internet after this lesson, and you can see that the Ark of Noah, the Ark wherever it was stuck in the Mount of Ararat, the mountainous range of Ararat, Asia Minor, I would say, in Turkey. So there is this Ark which people still think, I mean, the remnants of that Ark, that ship that was built, as a sign that it has still survived. We are now starting with a fresh anecdote. So you see, now the Quran has turned itself to various anecdotes. We have just read the anecdote of Noah, and now we are reading or about to read another anecdote of another prophet of God. It says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ كيف كان عذابي ونذر. Of course, that has already passed. Now, كذبت عاد فكيف كان عذابي ونذر. إنا أرسلنا عليهم ريحا صرصرا في يوم نحس مستمر تنزع الناس كأنهم أعجاز نخل منقعر فكيف كان عذابي ونذر ولقد يسرنا القرآن للذكر فهل من مدكر. So now we are talking about the people of Ad, who actually were the people who also belonged to a certain nation. The Prophet Saleh was sent to them for their correction. They are burning. Could you read the translation, please?
We have made this Qur'an very appropriate for reminding. So, is there anyone who shall take heed? Similarly, the Ad rejected. So, observe how was my punishment and how was my warning. On a day of perpetual bad omen, we let loose on them a stormy wind that plucked out people as if they were uprooted trunks of palm trees. So see how was my punishment and how was my warning. We have made this Quran very appropriate for reminding. So is there anyone who shall take heed?
Thank you for that. So you see, as you can see, that another anecdote has come up, and if you just go through these anecdotes, as some of the other ones are also going to succeed this one, is that these were the nations which had rejected their respective prophets, and they were destroyed in various ways. So we've just discussed the fate of Noah's nation. They were destroyed by a flood, by a huge flood. And here you can see another nation, which is the nation of Ad. And the Prophet Saleh was sent to them. The Prophet Hud was sent to them. And he actually also similarly warned them that they have denied. And it's not just a denial out of confusion. It is something which has happened all the time. So this is how they were denied. They were punished. So it says that the Almighty sent on them a stormy wind. So a huge storm was sent to the people of Ad, and they were plucked out from their places as if they were uprooted trunks of palm trees, and they were just strewn on the surface, and all of them destroyed. And the purpose here, actually, as you can see, is that there is one verse of the Quran which is repeated at the end of every anecdote, and that is وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. You see, when the first anecdote ended, the anecdote of Noah, it ended with these verses, which is, you can see the verse 17 here, which is being displayed. And once the anecdote of the prophet of the nation of Ad also ended, again the same verse has been repeated. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, which means that the Quran has been made appropriate, very, very apt for reminding people. And how is that? Because it has preserved the accounts of all these previous nations who had intentionally denied, and therefore they were put to this fate, and they were subjected to this fate. And this is how the Quran has made its appeal even more effective. It says, is there anyone who shall take heed? Isn't it enough that we have time and again sent our messengers to their respected nations, respective nations, and in spite of the fact that they were convinced of their veracity, they kept on denying. So the second example that we have now discussed is the example of the people of Ad, and to them, as I said, the prophet Hud, H-U-D, Hud, has been sent, and he was sent, and in spite of all his warnings and the fact that they were convinced of his veracity, they still ended up denying him. Now we come to another nation, which were, of course, but they were followed. I mean, this was the nation of Samud, and they came right after the nation of Ad, or at least sometime after the nation of Ad. And this is the text that you're being displayed. I'm just going to read it out before you, and then you will translate it. It says, "كذبت ثمود بالنذر فقالوا أبشرا منا واحدا نتبعه إنا إذا لفي ضلال وسعر ألقي الذكر عليه من بيننا بل هو كذاب عشر إنا مرسل سيعلمون غدا من الكذاب الأشر إنا مرسل الناقة فتنة لهم فارتقبهم واصطبر ونبئهم أن الماء قسمة بينهم كل شرب محتضر فنادوا صاحبهم فتعاطى فأقر." And I think the verse is going to end here, and we have that repetitive verse right after that, which is on the next page. فَكَيْفَ كَانَ عَذَابِي وَنُذُرْ, and we're just going to come to that just about in a minute. It says, "Inna mursilun, inna arsalna alayhim sayhatan wahidatan fakanu kahashim al-muhtazar." You see, now comes that verse. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Now, up till verse 32, we have the account of the next nation, and that is the nation of Samud, to whom the prophet Saleh was sent. We had previously the nation of Noah, and then we had the nation of Ad, to whom the prophet Hud was sent, and next in line is again another nation which were destroyed by in the same pattern, because of the same reasons. And as you can clearly see, that this also ends with that repetitive verse which says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ, which is verse 32, which you can see here, that the Almighty says that we have made this Qur'an very appropriate for reminding. And is there anyone who can take heed? Okay, let's read the translation before we go on to the next anecdote. And Omar, could you read the translation, please?
The Thamud also rejected this warning and said, "Are we to follow a person who is one of us? This would mean that we have indeed strayed and would end up in hell. Is he alone among us who has received this reminder? No, in fact, he is a dirty liar and boaster. Tomorrow then they shall know who the dirty liar and the boaster is. We are sending a she-camel as a test for them. So keep a watch on them and have patience, and inform them that the water has been divided between them and the she-camel. Now each one will come on the day of his turn." And at this they cried out to their leader. So he came forward and hamstrung the she-camel. Then behold, how was my punishment, and how was my warning. We sent upon them a single shout only, and they became like the trampled hedge of a sheepfold builder. We have made this Qur'an very appropriate for reminding. So is there anyone who shall take heed? The people of Lot also rejected the warning.
That's enough. We're about to read the next one in a moment. So the anecdote actually ends with verse 32, and again you can see the exact same pattern which is followed, that the messenger of God came to them. So before I just describe what happened to them, let me just give you this information that the Samud people were the remnants of Ad, and the Ad were known for their construction feats. They would construct huge buildings and colosseums and all those things. And once they passed away, they were actually succeeded much later by the people of Samud. And the Samud are also called the first Ad, or the remnants of the Ad. And for this reason, they also profess this huge proclivity towards construction. And for them, the Prophet Saleh warned them that they should mend their ways. But it happened that they actually did not do so. And like has been the pattern with previous prophets of God, they demanded a sign. They said that, well, if you're going to be punished, then show us a sign. And precisely the sign that you have just out here is what was shown to them. And that was that the Prophet Samud said, the Prophet Saleh told them that, well, if you want a sign, here is a sign for you. This she camel is going to be here, and she is going to drink from a fountain, and you are going to drink from the fountain as well. But you should not disturb that she camel. You must have separate days of drinking reserved for you, and you should not touch this she camel, because if you do so, a punishment of God would descend upon you. And they thought that he was making fun of them, or maybe he was just joking. So instead of taking heed to this warning, what they did was they hamstrung the camel. You know what a hamstring? How do you hamstring a camel? Well, the hamstring of the hamstring of a camel basically is near his legs, the lower part of his legs. And for a she camel or a camel, this is a way in which once you cut off that hamstring, or you sever that hamstring, a lot of blood actually flows from a camel, and ultimately he dies. The best way to kill a camel is to hamstring that camel, and that is what the leader of the Samud did. And instead of paying heed, look what he said. He said that he's a dirty liar and a boaster. So this is how prophets have been actually called and made fun of by their people. Instead of paying heed, they would just make names. They would just call them by names. As you can see, one of them is that he's just a person who is boasting. He's a dirty liar, and we just cannot, go along with what he is saying. And when they, in spite of all these warnings, did not pay heed, we know that they hamstrung the camel, and then within the next few days, that punishment arrived, and that punishment actually totally shook them. And this is mentioned right ahead, which we just read, that inna arsalna alayhim sayhatan wahidatan fakanu ka hashim al-muhtadhir. We sent upon them a single shout, and they became like a trampled hedge of a sheepfold builder. It was like an earthquake that was sent to them, and that earthquake was that totally ravished them. And there is another version which says that, in fact, the correct version is that that sayha, or that shout, was the lightning visiting them, and there was a huge storm as a result of that lightning, and that totally destroyed them. And again, we find the same verse being repeated at the end. وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Okay, now we move on to the next anecdote, and that is the anecdote of the Prophet Lot. Okay, Maryam Idris, could you please read the translation? Maryam Idris. It says, كذبت قوم لوط بالنذر إنا أرسلنا عليهم حاصبا إلا آل لوط نجيناهم بسحر نعمة من عندنا كذلك نجزي من شكر ولقد أنذرهم بطشتنا فتنذر ولقد راودوه عن ضيفه فتمسنا أعينهم فذوقوا عذابي ونذر ولقد صبحهم بكرا عذاب مستقر فذوقوا عذابي ونذر وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. So now we come to the anecdote of the Prophet Lot, and it ends on the same note as all the previous anecdotes ended. Okay, Maryam, you can now go ahead and read the translation from verse 33.
Then behold, how was my punishment and how was my warning? We sent upon them a single shout only, and
So,
then became...
Maryam, you have to read it from verse 33. Which says that the people of Lot also rejected the warning.
The people of Lot also rejected the warning.
Yeah.
We unleashed on them a stone-charged whirlwind. Only the family of Lot survived. As a special favor, we bailed them out in the later part of the night. Thus do we reward those who are grateful.
Yeah. So, yes, we have gone to the next page. We just the anecdote is still continuing. Go ahead, Maryam.
Lot had certainly informed them of our grasp, but they kept objecting to his warning, and they urged him to stop supporting his guests. So we blinded their eyes. Now taste my wrath and my warning. Then it happened that, at daybreak, an abiding punishment seized them. So, taste the flavor of my punishment and my warning. We have made this Qur'an very appropriate for reminding. So, is there anyone who shall take heed?
So, thank you very much, Maryam. So, you can see that in this section we have the description of the Prophet Lot and his nation. Regarding the Prophet Lot, as is the case with all the other previous prophets, you see, the Quran is replete with their stories. It's not that their stories or their anecdotes, they are mentioned in just one surah. Uh, this Surah Cover, actually briefly mentions them, but we have details of their stories and their anecdotes spread over the Quran, all over the Quran, in fact. And when these details are spread all over the Quran, the best way is that we gather all the details of each prophet from all these various surahs, and then we can have a complete picture. So, in the case of Prophet Lot, we know that as far as their people were concerned, they had this deviance in them that they would satisfy their sexual urge with men, and the natural way in which, of course, as husband and wife, you do that, they disregarded that totally, and they not only did that, they denied the Prophet Lot. They were also guilty of denying God as the only creator, and they indulged in polytheism, as was the case with the previous nations as well. So all the previous nations that we have just studied, from Prophet Noah to the nation of Ad, to the nation of Samud, all of them were guilty of polytheism, of associating partners with God, and also some of the other crimes. So, in case of Prophet Lot, not only were they guilty of polytheism, they also indulged in this heinous sin in which they would satisfy their sexual urge through other men, and this was regarded as something very bad, and therefore they were destroyed, not because of this indulgence, but basically because they had associated partners with God, and this was an additional sin that they were guilty of. And the way it has been described here, you can see, is that they were a stone-charged wind, a whirlwind was it was unleashed on them. So it was like a cyclone. It was like a cyclone, and there were stones revolving at a very high speed on in that cyclone, and then they struck the family or the people, and only the family of Lot survived. As a special favor, the Almighty says, we bail them out in the later part of the night, and thus do we reward those who are grateful. The wife of Lot also, she was also guilty of the same sin of associating partners with God. So therefore, she was also destroyed. Once again, telling us this or informing us of this huge system of merit vis-a-vis the prophets of God. Noah's son could not save himself because of the fact that, in spite of being the son of a prophet of God, because he indulged in something which was absolutely against justice, he was taken to task. Similarly is the case with the wife of the prophet Lot. She could not survive because of similar reasons, which tells us that it is it does not carry any weight whether you're related to a prophet or God or not if you do not adhere to justice and righteousness. And they were finally destroyed as part of the Almighty's plan, that people who intentionally deny prophets of God, who indulge in polytheism, in spite of the fact that this is something which their own conscience tells them is wrong, the Almighty takes them to task and He punishes them. Okay, now let's move on to the closing part of the surah ending now. But before it ends, it actually takes us to another part. And as far as the plot is concerned, there is a part which has followed up, which is followed up, and this is verse 36 and 40. Let me read its translation so that we can finish this episode and then go on to the next episode. So it says, وَلَقَدْ أَنْذَرَهُمْ بَطْشَتَنَا فَتَمَارَوْا بِالنُّذُرِ وَلَقَدْ رَاوَدُوهُ عَنْ ضَيْفِهِ فَتَمَسْنَا أَعْيُنَهُمْ فَذُوقُوا عَذَابِي وَنُذُرِ وَلَقَدْ صَبَّحَهُمْ بُكْرَةً عَذَابٌ مُسْتَقِرٌّ فَذُوقُوا عَذَابِي وَنُذُرِ وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ فَهَلْ مِن مُدَّكِرٍ. Okay, can I ask Zara Bernie the translation of this paragraph?
Lot
Yes, go ahead.
certainly informed them of our grasp, but they kept objecting to his warning, and they urged him to stop supporting his guests. So we blinded their eyes. Now taste my wrath and my warning. Then it happened that at daybreak an abiding punishment seized them. So taste the flavor of my punishment and my warning. We have made this Qur'an very appropriate for reminding. So is there anyone who shall take heed?
Okay, thank you, Zara, for that. And you can see that basically these words that we have just read, that uh, we stopped him from supporting his guests. So you see, what happened was that these guests arrived uh, in the house of Lot. They were actually eight, and these people of Lot, actually the nation of Lot, when they saw that these handsome boys or guys had arrived, so in order to satisfy their lust, they came running to the house of Lot so that they could do what they wanted to do. And the punishment, which you can see has been mentioned here, is that we blinded their eyes. I mean, their eyes were totally effaced. And they, besides, of course, the fact that the stone charged wind, which we've just seen in the previous paragraph, that a huge cyclone came. It was like a tempest which had stones retorting in it in a very high speed, and they struck them. And not only that, it blinded their eyes and they were totally destroyed. So this finishes the anecdote of the Prophet Lot. And now we have a very small anecdote in a couple of sentences that we are going to discuss. And that is the anecdote of the Pharaoh and Moses. So the words are, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَ آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ النُّذُرُ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا كُلِّهَا فَأَخَذْنَاهُمْ أَخْذَ عَزِيزٍ مُقْتَدِرٍ أَكُفَّارُكُمْ خَيْرٌ مِنْ أُولَئِكُمْ أَمْ لَكُمْ بَرَاءَةٌ فِي الزُّبُرِ. Actually, what happens is from verse 43 onwards, the direction of address has shifted. And now the Quraysh, of course, who were right there in front of the Quran, are they are being addressed. So before we start off that part, just let me read the translation of verses this, 41 and 42, because that is what is related to the Pharaoh and Moses. It says, to the Pharaoh's people also came precisely this warning. They also rejected all our signs, so we seized them the way a mighty and a powerful one seizes. So, as I said, you see what happens is that the Quran has described the stories of the prophets of God in various surahs, and at some places these stories are very short and brief, and other places they are they are described very comprehensively. So you can see that this anecdote of the Pharaoh and Moses, which is described here in just two verses, 41 and 42, it has been discussed at length, for example, in Surah Taha or Surah Qasas or Surah Anbiya, some of the previous surahs of the Quran, in much more detail. But here, the purpose was just to present a very brief, very pinpointed sort of a warning, and telling the Quraysh that don't forget that the what happened to the Pharaoh, and how when he denied Moses, he was drowned when he was taken in the Red Sea. Of course, all of us know the story of the Prophet Moses, and how Pharaoh and Moses they were the ones who became signs of God's reward and punishment in this world. And when Pharaoh intentionally denied, so he was drowned in the Red Sea. We also know that just before drowning, the Pharaoh actually accepted faith. He actually said that I embrace faith, but the Almighty said that there is no use now, because you are accepting faith after seeing this punishment, and that carries no weight. Now, you see, what has happened is that up till now we have discussed the anecdotes of, first of all, the Prophet Noah, then the Prophet Hud, who was sent to the people of Ad. Then we have the Samud, to whom the Prophet Salih was sent, to whom the she camel was made a sign. So there are three of them. And at number 4, we had the anecdote of the Prophet Lot. And then at the 5th place, we have this anecdote of the Prophet Moses, who was sent to the Pharaoh. So these are the 5 anecdotes which have been repeatedly, as I said, mentioned in the Quran. And here they are mentioned in a very brief way. And once they have been mentioned, up to verse 42, because up to verse 42, it's all history. Now suddenly, the Quran turns to the people who were right in front of it, the Quraysh, the people of the Prophet's nation. And now it addresses them. And till the end of the surah, this address goes on. And we will end our discussion on the surah with these last words, which start off with verses 43 and go right up to the end. Okay, let me ask Musa, can you read out the remaining translation once I read out the text of the Quran? So I'm just going to read out the remaining text of the Quran, and so please read the translation once I finish with the text. So As I said, now the discourse shifts towards the people who are standing right in front of the Quran nation. So it says, أَكُفَّارُكُمْ خَيْرٌ مِّنْ أُولَٰئِكُمْ أَمْ لَكُمْ بَرَاءَةٌ فِي الزُّبُرِ نَحْنُ جَمِيعٌ مُنتَصِرٌ سَيُهْزَمُ الْجَمْعُ وَيُوَلُّونَ الدُّبُرَ السَّاعَةُ مَوْعِدُهُمْ وَالسَّاعَةُ أَدْهَىٰ وَأَمَرُّ إِنَّ المجرمين في ضلال وسعر يوم يسحبون في النار على وجوههم ذوقوا مس سقر إنا كل شيء خلقناه بقدر وما أمرنا إلا واحدة كلمح بالبصر ولقد أهلكنا أشياعكم فهل من مدكر وكل شيء فعلوه في الزبر وكل صغير وكبير مستطر إن المتقين في جنات ونهر في مقعد صدق عند مليك مقتدر. So it is now that the surah comes to an end with the anecdote or with the warning which is sounded to the people who are now right in front of the Quran. Okay, Musa, could you please read the translation from verse 43 onwards?
O believers of the Quraysh, are these disbelievers among you any better than them, or is there an accountable written for you in the scriptures? Do they claim, we are a group who has the ability to fight back? Listen clearly. This group of theirs shall soon be routed, and turning their backs they will be fleeing away. No, in fact, the actual time of fulfillment of the promise made to them is the day of judgment, and the day of judgment will be very stern and very bitter for these disbelievers. These wrongdoers in reality are in great error and shall definitely end up in hell. They shall remember the day when they shall be dragged faceward into its flames. Taste now the sensation of hell. They shall not make haste. We have created everything according to a measure, and our directive will only be one directive that will be fulfilled in the blink of an eye. We have in similar manner destroyed people like you before this. So is there anyone who will take heed from their fate? Everything they have done is recorded in registers, and every matter, small or great, has been noted down. On the contrary, those who fear God will dwell in the bliss of orchards and rivers, a place of true honor, before a very mighty king.
So thank you for that, Musa. So you see, if you study the whole surah, you can clearly see that the Quraysh are being warned, and for this warning, the most effective method which has been employed is that the story or the anecdote of all the previous or the major prophets of God or the major messengers of God which preceded them, they have been put forth, and each of them actually was guilty of denying its prophet, and each of them met the same fate. So what the Quraysh are being told now, the Quraysh, remember, are the nation of the people, the tribe of the prophet was the Quraysh. So now they are being told that, look, it's now your turn. If you also deny your messenger in a similar way that these previous nations denied their respective prophets, you will end up with the same fate, and you'll be dragged face down towards hell. And on the other hand, those of you who would profess faith, they will be rewarded. They'll dwell in bliss in the hereafter, and everything will be good for them. But if you don't, then this is how you're going to face your destruction. And history tells us, my dear friends, that most of the tribe of the Quraysh, the Prophet's tribe, actually accepted faith, and this fate never met them. I mean, they never met this fate. And since most of them, barring a very few, they had already accepted faith, so they were spared from this punishment. But again, as you can see, that the purpose of this punishment was to let them know that if they follow their ways, then it's not going to be any different from them. So if we sum up the whole surah, we can see that basically this surah is trying to tell the Quraysh to mend their ways, the tribe of the Prophet to mend their ways, to tell them that if they are worshipping other gods, other deities besides God Himself, then first of all they should they should get ready to face this punishment, because once the truth has been unveiled to them, they themselves know that worshipping more than one God is something which is not on, which they themselves think is something which is wrong. But out of arrogance, out of hatred, out of a number of other things, they have intentionally denied. So the message here that you can see is that all the nations of God who existed or which existed in the prophetic era, they met their lesser day of judgment, so to speak. And on the greater day of judgment, when each one of us will be will be faced with the same ordeal, we should keep reminding ourselves today and every day that comes in our life that accountability is something which is going to take place for every person. So, in one word, the message of the whole surah is to be aware of accountability, because this is something which took place for all previous nations of the world. And this is something which is going to take place for us as well. We just cannot spare ourselves from accountability. And because of the fact that we will be held accountable before the Almighty one day, we have to constantly reconsider our lives. We have to constantly revisit what we are doing. Are we righteous individuals? Are we people who are prone towards humanity, who have this sympathy, compassion, kindness, care for other people, who look after other people, who also have a strong God connection? Then, of course, we can fancy ourselves to be people who might who might end up in paradise. Otherwise, of course, as you can see how this verse portrays, or the surah portrays, that destruction is something which is ordained for us. Another thing that needs to be understood here is that in the prophetic era, when these nations of God were destroyed, as you can see, they were. The reason was that they had actually there were people who were prone to arrogance, and they actually, in spite of the fact that they had no proof of associating partners with God, they just ended up doing so. And on many occasions, when they were asked that why they did that, well, we found our forefathers doing this. They have been practicing polytheism. They have been associating other deities. And then when they were asked, that, is there a reason for you to believe that there are more than one God? They said, well, we don't have a reason, but this is how we have just inherited this worship. And the Quran actually said, well, the only reason that you could have worshipped more than one God was that if God himself had informed them that, well, I have more partners and you can worship them as well. And because of the fact that the Almighty never said that he has partners, so what they are doing is they are imputing falsehood to God. And in the words of the Quran, it's called iftara Allah. They are ascribing falsity towards God, because they had no means to know if God had any partner, and they have done this out of their own fancy and out of their own desire. So this surah actually tells us how important we are. I mean, we have to consider this element of accountability in us. And accountability is something which should be writ large before us regarding every undertaking that we do, regarding the days that we spend, regarding the people that we into. And remember, accountability starts with your own self. I mean, when you think that you are going to be held accountable to the Almighty in the way these nations were, then each and everything that we do has to be revisited. It has to be planned, and we are able to, we end up doing something which is not something correct, or we're not very proud of. Remember, the Almighty always forgives people if they do something wrong and immediately understand, or start to repent and ask for his forgiveness. So it's not that we just cannot sin. No, the thing is that our attitude after doing something bad, after committing a mistake, that is what matters. If that sin is against God, we must make amends. If that sin is something which is against God and which is against the society, maybe we've been rude to some person, maybe we have talked badly with some person, then we have to apologize with that person as well. It's not sufficient that we ask forgiveness before God because of the fact that we have wronged or have been unjust to other people. So the purpose today, my dear friends and participants, was to expose you to this Quranic text, and inshallah we'll be doing that in our future sessions as well. So I'll urge you to whenever you have the time, you've studied the 54th surah of the Quran, just pick up the text of the Quran whenever you have time to read the surah again. If you have questions, you can always ask them. Of course, there are historical references, like, for example, if you would like to have more details who these nations were, like what exactly was the nation of Lot doing, and what were their characteristics. Similarly, the deluge or the storm or the flood which came in the time of the Prophet Noah, we find it a lot of detail in other surahs of the Quran, and another source that you can really be looking into whenever you have the time is the Bible. So the Bible also actually narrates all these stories. The only thing is that at times it is not very precise because of the fact that the originals have not survived. So you can read these biblical stories of all these prophets as well. And if you compare them with the Quran, you'll find out if there is any discrepancy. In case of a discrepancy, of course, the Quran shall be held superior and shall be followed as a result. So I think the takeaway from today's lesson is that accountability has to be something that all of us must keep thinking. Accountability to our own self, accountability to our parents, accountability to the society that we live in, to the country that we live in, and ultimately to God Almighty. So if you have any questions before we sign off, I'd be glad to answer them. Okay, it seems that there are no questions. So inshallah, we'll see each other next week with another surah. And inshallah, I do hope that this textual study of the Quran will enkindle in us this motivation to read the Book of God as much as we can, and preferably to set a time every day to study it with a good translation and make it a habit so that we are able to connect with God in a more effective way. So until next week, it is Khuda Hafiz from your teacher.